She didn't say a word. That was the part one couldn't get past. 8 months of silence between us. 8 months of time zones and bad Wi-Fi and messages that arrived a day late. And when Rowan Callahan finally walked through the arrivals gate and saw me standing there, she didn't say hello. She didn't ask why I'd come. She just dropped her bag on the floor of the airport and walked straight into me like she'd been rehearsing it the entire flight home. My name is Miles Hartley. I'm 33, and until that morning at the airport, I would have told you I was a careful man. Careful with money, careful with deadlines, careful with the kind of feelings that could get a person hurt if he wasn't paying attention. I was wrong about the last one. I'd just been careful with the wrong things. I worked as a project architect for a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's coffee order and nobody's personal life stayed private for long, no matter how hard you tried. I'd been there 6 years by the time Rowan joined the structural engineering team, and if you had told me on her first day that she would eventually become the center of gravity, my whole life quietly rearranged itself around, I would have laughed and gone back to my drawings. That's the thing about the people who end up matching most. They rarely announce themselves. They just show up, unremarkable at first, and then one day you look up and realize you've built half your week around the sound of their voice in the next room. Rowan was 31 when she started, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh, with a habit of tucking a pencil behind her ear and forgetting it was there until someone pointed it out. She had light brown hair she kept in a low knot, a laugh that carried farther than she probably wanted it to, and an engineer's precision that made her murder every lazy assumption in every meeting she sat in. The first time we worked together, on a mixed-use development downtown, she caught a load calculation error in my draft that would have cost the firm a very embarrassing phone call from the client. She didn't gloat about it. She just slid the marked-up page back across the table and said, "You're welcome," like she already knew I'd been about to thank her and wanted to save us both the time. I liked her immediately, not in the dramatic way people describe in movies, more like the way you like a song you've heard once and can't stop humming without noticing you're doing it. We became the kind of coworkers who ate lunch together more often than not, who texted about nothing at 11 at night, who developed a shorthand so specific that other people in the office eventually stopped trying to follow our conversations and just waited for us to translate. My friend Nate from the mechanical engineering team used to call us the committee because apparently no decision at that firm felt final until Rowan and I had both weighed in on it, even the ones that had nothing to do with either of our jobs. Neither of us called it anything more than friendship, and for a long time, that felt true enough. I dated on and off during those years, nothing that ever stuck. Rowan dated too, briefly, a guy named Tobias who worked in finance and wore his ambition like cologne. I never told her what I thought of him. I didn't have to. It ended on its own within 4 months, and she came back to the office the following Monday with a to-go coffee for me and the words, "Don't say it," before I'd even opened my mouth. I hadn't planned to. I was too busy being relieved and telling myself that relief didn't mean anything. That was the pattern for years. Close enough that people constantly asked if we were together, distant enough from the question that we both had 100 easy reasons to say no. Looking back, I think we were both protecting something we weren't ready to name. The way you keep a fragile object wrapped in newspaper long after you've unpacked everything else, because unwrapping it means deciding what to do with it. There's one night from those early years I keep coming back to, even now, because I think it was the first time I understood how much trouble I was in. We were 3 weeks out from a permit deadline on a mixed-income housing project, the kind of deadline that turns an entire office into a caffeinated, short-tempered version of itself, and Rowan and I had stayed until nearly 1 in the morning trying to reconcile a stack of structural drawings that refused to match the architectural set no matter how many times we ran the numbers. Everyone else had gone home hours earlier. The office was dark except for the 2 lamps at our desks and the blue glow of her monitor reflecting off her glasses, which she only wore when she was too tired to bother with contacts anymore. Somewhere around midnight, we gave up trying to solve it and just sat there, half delirious, eating stale vending machine pretzels and making up increasingly ridiculous explanations for the discrepancy, blaming gremlins, blaming the intern, blaming a rogue decimal point we nicknamed Steve. Rowan laughed so hard at one point that she knocked her coffee over, and I remember grabbing napkins from my desk drawer and mopping it up while she apologized between fits of exhausted giggling and thinking, with a kind of clarity that scared me a little, that I would rather be here, at 1 in the morning, cleaning up spilled coffee with this particular woman, than anywhere else on earth with anyone else in it. We should call it, she said eventually, wiping her eyes. Steve wins tonight. Steve always wins, I said. Steve's undefeated. She started gathering her things, and for a second, standing there in the half-dark with her coat halfway on and her hair falling loose from the knot she'd tied it in that morning, she looked over at me and said, quieter than the joke deserved, "I'm glad it's you I get stuck here with at midnight and not literally anyone else in this office." Even Steve? Especially not Steve. Steve's the problem. I laughed, and the moment passed the way moments like that always seemed to pass between us, close enough to something real that I could feel the edge of it, and then gone, folded back into the safety of a joke before either of us had to decide what to do with it. I walked her to her car that night, the parking lot empty and cold, and stood there a beat too long after she'd gotten in, like some part of me was waiting for a reason to say something neither of us was ready for. She rolled down her window, told me to go home and sleep, and drove off, and I stood in that empty lot for another minute before I finally talked myself into leaving too. I didn't think about that night again for a long time. I didn't let myself. But it was there, quietly, underneath everything that came after, the first proof that whatever I felt for her wasn't going to stay simple no matter how hard I tried to keep it that way. Then, the spring I turned 32, the firm won a bid on an infrastructure project in Bergen, Norway, a pedestrian bridge redesign that needed a structural lead willing to relocate for the better part of a year. Rowan was the obvious choice. She was the best engineer we had. She spoke passable Norwegian from a college semester abroad, and she'd been angling for exactly this kind of opportunity since the day she was hired. When the partners announced it in the Thursday meeting, I watched her face carefully. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a door to open and was already halfway through it before anyone finished the sentence. I was happy for her. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story like I resented her success, and I didn't. I was proud of her in a way that made my chest ache a little, the specific ache of watching someone you care about get exactly what they've earned while knowing it's going to cost you something too. What I wasn't prepared for was how much the ache widened once the departure date actually arrived. We had a small gathering the week before she left. Nothing fancy, just a handful of us at a bar near the office with too many string lights and not enough seating. Nate gave a toast that was mostly a list of inside jokes nobody else understood, and Rowan laughed until she had to wipe under her eyes, careful not to smudge her mascara. I watched her from across the table and felt something settle in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet, something heavier than the ordinary sadness of a coworker moving away. Near the end of the night, she found me by the door where I'd stepped outside for air that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're quiet tonight," she said, arms crossed against the evening chill, her coat still slung over one arm instead of on. "I'm always quiet," I said. "You're just usually the one filling the silence." She smiled at that, but it didn't reach all the way to her eyes. 8 months isn't that long. No, I agreed. It isn't. You'll survive without the committee. I didn't say I wouldn't survive. She looked at me a beat too long, like she was waiting for me to finish the sentence honestly instead of safely. I didn't. I told myself it wasn't the right moment, standing outside a bar with condensation soaking through the knee of my jeans from where I'd leaned against a cold railing. I told myself there would be other moments. That was my first mistake, believing there was an unlimited supply of them. "Text me when you land," I said instead. "Obviously," she said, and the word came out softer than the sarcasm it was dressed in. Then she hugged me, quick and ordinary, the kind of hug you give someone you'll see again in a week, not 8 months, and went back inside to say goodbye to everyone else. I told myself that was fine. I told myself a lot of things that autumn. For the first 6 weeks, the distance barely registered. Rowan texted constantly. Photos of Bergen's colored houses stacked up the hillside, like something out of a postcard nobody believed was real. Complaints about Norwegian building codes. Screenshots of her broken attempts at ordering coffee in a language she was rustier at than she'd let on. I sent her updates from the office, mostly gossip and the small disasters that happen whenever you remove one competent person from a team and watch everyone else scramble to cover the gap. It felt, for a while, like she'd just moved to a different floor of the same building. Then the time difference started doing what time differences do. Her mornings were my late nights. Her exhausted end-of-day check-ins landed while I was asleep, and by the time I answered, she was already back at the job site, radio silent for hours at a stretch. The text got shorter, not colder, just thinner, the way a river gets thin when it's been diverted somewhere else. I told myself it was normal. I told myself 8 months wasn't that long. The same sentence she'd used the night she left, except now I was the one saying it to convince myself instead of her. Around month 3, Nate made the mistake of asking me, over lunch, whether Rowan and I had ever actually talked about what we were. We're friends, I said, too quickly. Sure, Nate said, unwrapping his sandwich like the conversation bored him, which was how I knew it didn't. Friends who used to finish each other's blueprints and now barely text. Real casual stuff. She's busy. It's an 8-month project on another continent. Right, Nate said. And you've been in a genuinely foul mood since October. But sure, that's about the client meetings. I didn't have a good answer for that, because he wasn't wrong. I had been in a mood. I noticed it in small ways. The extra minute I spent staring at my phone waiting for a reply that wasn't coming as fast as it used to. The way I'd started declining invitations from friends because none of them were the person I actually wanted to talk to. I told myself it was just the adjustment period, the natural cost of losing your closest work friend to another continent. It took a woman named Harper, who I went on exactly 2 dates with that winter, to make me admit it was something else. Harper was smart and funny and interested in me in a way that should have been flattering. On our second date, over dinner at a place with candles that made everyone look slightly more romantic than they actually were, she asked who I was texting, because apparently I'd checked my phone 3 times in 20 minutes without noticing. Nobody important, I said, which was a lie, because I'd been checking for a message from Rowan that still hadn't come. Harper studied me for a second, the particular look of a smart woman deciding whether a mediocre evening was worth a second act. You know, she said carefully, you talk about your coworker in Norway more than you've talked about anything else tonight. I opened my mouth to argue and found I didn't have the argument ready. That's not, I started, and then stopped, because it was. It's fine, Harper said, and to her credit, she said it kindly. I'm not upset. I just don't want to be the placeholder for someone who already has your attention. That's not fair to either of us. We didn't go on a third date. I drove home that night, turning her sentence over and over. The placeholder for someone who already has your attention. And by the time I got to my apartment, I had finally, embarrassingly late, admitted to myself what everyone around me seemed to have already figured out. I wasn't missing a friend. I was in love with a woman on the other side of an ocean, and I had been for longer than I wanted to count, and I had let 8 months of silence and half-answered texts convince me it was safer not to say so. I didn't call her that night. I told myself I needed to think it through properly, to be sure, as if a person could think their way out of something that had clearly already happened whether I gave it permission or not. That was my second mistake. Not calling her the night I finally understood what I felt, because that gap, that small cowardly gap between knowing and acting, is exactly where things go wrong. Around month 5, the texts thinned out even further. Rowan mentioned, almost in passing, that the project was expanding scope, that she'd been asked to extend her stay by another 6 to 8 weeks to see the second phase through. She apologized for it like it was something she owed me, and I told her not to be ridiculous, that of course she should stay if the work needed her. all the while feeling something in my chest quietly cave in at the thought of even more distance stacking on top of what already felt unbearable. Then, near the end of month 6, something shifted that I didn't understand until much later. Rowan stopped mentioning Bergen's charms, stopped sending photos. Her messages, when they came, felt careful in a way they never had before, like she was editing herself before hitting send. I asked if everything was okay. She said she was just tired. I believed her because it was easier than the alternative, which was wondering whether the distance had done something to us that a few good conversations couldn't undo. What I didn't know, what I only found out weeks later, was that a colleague on her project team, a Norwegian structural lead named Soren, had made his interest in her fairly clear somewhere around month 5, and that Rowan had spent several weeks quietly, privately, trying to figure out why the offer of something easy and immediate and standing right in front of her didn't appeal to her at all. She told me later that she'd gone for a drink with him once, mostly out of politeness, and had spent the entire evening wishing she were describing the restaurant's terrible service to me over text instead of sitting across from the man who'd invited her. I kept thinking about how you would have made fun of the wine list, she told me eventually. That should have told me everything a lot sooner than it did. But in the moment, all I knew was that something had changed, some quiet retreat I couldn't name and didn't know how to ask about without sounding paranoid. So I didn't ask. I just waited, the way you wait for weather to pass, telling myself it would clear up once she was home. Around that same stretch, we tried a video call, one of the few we managed the entire 8 months, given how badly our schedules lined up. It was late for me, early morning for her, and she answered from a kitchenette in her rented apartment, hair still damp, a mug of coffee in one hand. And for the first few minutes it felt almost normal, easy, like no time had passed at all. Then I asked, carelessly, how things were going with the team out there, and I watched something flicker across her face before she smoothed it over. Fine, she said. Busy. You know how it is. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. She smiled, but it didn't sit right on her face. Too quick, too practiced. How's the Hendrix project going without me making everyone's lives difficult? I let her change the subject because I didn't know how not to, because pushing felt like a door I wasn't sure I had the right to open from 6,000 miles away. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and when we hung up, I sat on my couch in the dark for a long time afterward, replaying that flicker on her face, trying to decide whether I'd imagined it. I hadn't. I know that now. That was the week Soren had first asked her to dinner, and she'd said yes out of politeness, and spent the entire meal wondering why she felt like she was cheating on a relationship that, on paper, didn't exist yet. Neither of us said any of that out loud at the time. We just let the call end a little too soon, both of us carrying something we weren't ready to name back into our separate time zones. Home. That word did a lot of work in my head that winter. I started counting down without meaning to, marking the calendar in my head the way you count down to a court date, some mixture of dread and hope so tangled together I couldn't separate them anymore. Nate noticed. Nate noticed everything, which was either his best quality or his most exhausting one, depending on the week. You know she's coming back in 3 weeks, right? He said one Tuesday, apropos of nothing, sliding into the chair across from my desk. I'm aware. You gonna do something about it? Or are we doing another 8 months of you being weird about your phone? I don't know what you're talking about. Nate gave me a look that I'd learned, over the years, meant he was too tired to argue and too right to let it go. Miles. Buddy, you've had a countdown app on your phone since September. I saw it when you asked me to hold your phone at Renata's going-away party. I didn't have a defense for that, because it was true, and because saying it out loud to Nate made it undeniably, embarrassingly real in a way that thinking it privately never had. I don't know what to say to her, I admit it. It's been 8 months. What if I say something, and it ruins everything we already have? Nate leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, giving me the particular expression of a man who has heard a lot of nonsense in his life and recognized this immediately as more of it. Or, he said slowly, you say nothing, And you spend the next 8 years watching her marry some guy who isn't scared of his own feelings, and you get to be best man at a wedding that should have been yours. Your call. I didn't answer him, but I thought about it for the rest of the week. That image he'd planted, some future version of myself standing at the edge of a life I could have had if I'd just been brave enough to reach for it in time. It sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. 3 weeks became 2. 2 became 1. Rowan's messages picked back up in that final stretch, shorter but more frequent, little countdown notes of her own. Packing tonight. Can't believe this is actually ending. I don't know what I'm more scared of, staying or coming back. That last one stopped me cold when I read it, sitting alone in my apartment at 11 at night with the lamp on and my laptop open to a project I wasn't actually working on. I read it 4 times before I answered, trying to figure out what she meant by it. Whether coming back scared her because of the job, the reentry, the ordinary logistics of moving your whole life back across an ocean, or because of something closer to what scared me. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the one that finally felt honest enough to send. Whatever you're scared of, you don't have to carry it alone when you land. I'm here. She didn't respond right away. For almost 2 hours, the message sat there unanswered, and I spent that entire stretch convinced I'd said too much, tipped my hand too soon, ruined 8 months of careful restraint with one sentence sent at the wrong time to a woman who might not have meant what I hoped she meant. Then, finally, 3 words came back. I'm holding you to that. I read it a dozen times. I still have the screenshot, if I'm honest, saved in a folder on my phone I've never deleted. Her flight landed on a Thursday morning in early June, a little after 9, after a red-eye connecting through Reykjavik that she described in a text the night before as 11 hours of turbulence and existential crisis, in that order. I hadn't told her I was coming to the airport. That part mattered to me, though I couldn't have explained exactly why at the time. I think some part of me needed to see her face in the specific, unguarded moment before she'd had time to arrange her expression for an audience. Needed to know what was true before either of us had the chance to perform anything for the other. I got to the arrivals hall almost 90 minutes early, which even I recognized as excessive, and spent most of that time pacing a stretch of floor near the exit doors, rehearsing sentences I knew I'd abandon the second I actually saw her. Nate had offered to come with me for moral support, an offer I declined immediately and with more force than the moment probably required. Some things you have to do alone, even when you're terrified of doing them wrong. The arrivals board updated her flight status to landed at 9:14. I watched the doors for the next 25 minutes with the specific, useless intensity of someone trying to will a process to move faster through sheer force of attention. Passengers filtered out in loose clusters, families reuniting in noisy collisions near the barrier, a man in a business suit scanning the crowd for someone holding a sign with his name misspelled on it, an elderly couple embracing so tightly that the woman's sun hat fell off, and nobody noticed for a full minute. I watched all of it with half my attention, the other half fixed on the doors, waiting. Then I saw her. She came through pulling a suitcase with a wheel that clearly hadn't survived the trip, wearing an oversized cardigan over rumpled travel clothes, hair pulled back in the kind of knot that happens somewhere around hour 9 of a long-haul flight rather than the deliberate kind she usually wore. She looked exhausted and pale under the fluorescent lights, and more beautiful to me in that unguarded, wrecked state than she had in any photo she'd sent me over the previous 8 months. She was scanning the crowd out of habit, the way you do when you've just landed somewhere and haven't fully believed you're actually there yet, and then her eyes found me. She stopped walking. For one full second, neither of us moved. I watched something shift across her face, surprise first, then something that looked almost like disbelief, like she needed a moment to confirm I wasn't a trick of jet lag and airport lighting. Then she let go of the suitcase handle entirely, leaving it standing upright in the middle of the walkway with a stranger nearly tripping over it, and crossed the remaining distance between us at something just short of a run. She didn't say anything. That was the part that undid me completely. 8 months of careful texts, of thin explanations and half-finished conversations. And when she finally reached me, she didn't waste a single second on words. She just wrapped her arms around my neck and held on, her face pressed into my shoulder, breathing like she'd been holding it since Reykjavik. I held her back just as tightly, one hand at her waist, the other coming up to rest against the back of her head. And for a moment the entire airport disappeared. The noise, the announcements overhead, the stranger still untangling himself from her abandoned suitcase. There was just the specific, overwhelming relief of having her solid and real in my arms after 8 months of a screen between us. "You came," she finally said, muffled against my shoulder, her voice thick in a way that had nothing to do with the flight. I said I would. She pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes bright and a little wet, and I watched her take in my face like she was checking it against some memory she'd been carrying around for months, confirming it still matched. "I thought about you the entire flight," she said. "I had 11 hours to think about anything, and it was just you, over and over." Rowan. No, let me say this before I lose my nerve, because I've been rehearsing it since Norway, and if I stop now I'm never going to finish. She took a breath, hands still braced against my chest like she needed the contact to steady herself. "I went to Bergen thinking distance would be simple, out of sight, manageable, something I could survive without it changing anything. And instead I spent 8 months missing you in a way that had nothing to do with missing home, or missing the office, or missing anything except specifically you. There was a man there, Soren. He was kind and interested and completely uncomplicated, and I went out with him exactly once and spent the entire dinner wishing I was describing it to you instead of sitting across from him." "I know," I said quietly. "I mean, I didn't know about him specifically, but I knew something had changed. I felt it in your messages." "I was scared," she admitted. "I kept thinking, what if I come home and say something and it ruins the only good, uncomplicated thing in my life? What if I'd rather have you as my friend forever than risk losing you as anything at all?" "I thought the exact same thing," I said. "For 8 months. I had an entire speech ready, and I kept talking myself out of it because I was so afraid of getting it wrong." She laughed, a short, wet, disbelieving sound. "So we've both been in love with each other since approximately September, and too terrified to say so." Hearing her say it out loud, in love, plainly, without hedging, landed somewhere in my chest like a key finally turning in a lock I hadn't realized was still stuck. "Since before September, if I'm honest," I said. "I think I've been in love with you since you told me I was welcome for correcting my load calculations and didn't even bother to look up from your coffee." "That's disgustingly specific." "You asked." She laughed again, and this time it turned into something closer to crying, the exhausted, overwhelmed kind that comes after holding something in for far too long. I pulled her back against me, and she let me, her hands fisting lightly in the back of my jacket like she needed something solid to hold on to, while 8 months of restraint finally came apart. "I have never been so relieved to see anyone in my entire life," she said into my shoulder. "Good," I said, "because I drove here at 7 in the morning and paid for airport parking, which, for the record, is basically a formal declaration of love in this economy." That got a real laugh out of her, the kind that shook her shoulders, and she pulled back to look at me properly, wiping under her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. "So what happens now?" she asked. "We just, what, walk out of here together and pretend the last 8 months of cowardice never happened?" "No," I said. "I think we walk out of here together and finally stop pretending. That seems like the better option." She reached for my hand instead of answering, lacing her fingers through mine like it was the most natural gesture in the world, like we'd been doing it for years instead of doing it for the first time in the middle of a crowded arrivals hall with a rogue suitcase still standing somewhere behind us. "Okay," she said. "Let's stop pretending, then." We retrieved her suitcase, apologized to the stranger who'd nearly gone down over it, and walked out to the parking garage hand in hand, both of us too tired and too full of feeling to talk much beyond the small, ordinary logistics of getting her bags into my car. But every few minutes, she'd glance over at me like she was checking I was still real, and every time I caught her doing it, something warm settled a little further into place in my chest. I want to tell you the rest of it happened easily after that. That 8 months of tension simply dissolved the moment we admitted the truth to each other. But that would be dishonest, and this story deserves better than a tidy lie. The truth is, the weeks that followed were their own kind of complicated, not because either of us doubted what we felt, but because we had built an entire friendship on a foundation of careful restraint, and learning to be honest with each other in this new way took practice neither of us had. There was, for one thing, the small matter of company policy. Our firm didn't forbid relationships between coworkers outright, but it required disclosure if two employees on the same project team became involved, and Rowan and I had, until her Norway assignment ended, been paired on nearly every major project that came through the office. We sat down with HR together 3 weeks after she got back, both of us nervous in a way that felt almost funny given everything else we'd already survived that year, and disclosed the relationship formally. The partners reassigned us to different project leads going forward, a change that stung a little professionally, but felt like nothing at all compared to what we'd already risked to get here. There was also Nate, who took an embarrassing amount of credit for the entire outcome, reminding anyone who would listen that he had personally told me to stop being a coward about my feelings months before I actually did anything about it. Rowan found this hilarious. I found it slightly less hilarious, mostly because he wasn't wrong, and being right about something is apparently Nate's favorite personality trait. And there was Soren, who Rowan eventually told the whole truth to over a brief, kind video call a few weeks after she'd landed, explaining as gently as she could that whatever had almost started in Bergen had never really had a chance against a feeling she'd been carrying with her the entire time. One that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a coworker back home who fixed everyone's blueprints and somehow never noticed he'd fixed something in her too. We took things slower than either of us expected, given how long we'd already waited. Our first actual date happened almost 2 weeks after the airport. A quiet dinner at a place with none of the fanfare either of us would have staged if we'd been trying to impress a stranger, because we weren't trying to impress each other. We already knew each other completely. What we were doing now was simply choosing, deliberately and out loud, to keep what we'd already built and call it by its real name. You know what's strange? Rowan said that night, turning her water glass slowly on the table between us. I spent 8 months terrified that telling you the truth would ruin everything. And instead it just feels like the last 8 years finally make sense. That's not strange, I said. That's just what happens when you stop being afraid of the thing you actually want. She reached across the table and took my hand, the same easy gesture from the airport, already familiar in a way that felt like it belonged to us specifically, like nobody else in the world could have done it quite that way. I'm glad I forgot to say anything at the airport, she said. I had this whole speech ready, and then I saw you standing there, and none of the words mattered anymore. I just needed to hold on to something real for a second. For the record, I said, you didn't need the speech. The holding on said plenty. 6 months later, we moved in together, into a place close enough to the office that neither of us had an excuse to be late, close enough to each other. Finally, that 8 months of ocean between us started to feel like something that had happened to other people in another life. Rowan kept a small framed photo on our bookshelf from that day at the airport, taken by a stranger she'd asked afterward, half embarrassed, to snap a picture of us standing by the arrivals board, her hair still a wreck from the flight, both of us laughing at something neither of us remembers anymore. She says she wants to be able to look at it on the days work gets hard and remember exactly what it felt like to stop being scared. A year after that, almost to the week, I proposed to her in the same airport, though I'll admit the staff were considerably less charmed by a marriage proposal blocking foot traffic near the arrivals gate than they probably would have liked. Rowan said yes before I'd even finished the sentence properly, then laughed so hard through her tears that half the strangers walking past assumed we were filming something for social media. We weren't. We were just finally, fully, out loud. Exactly what we'd been quietly building since the day she corrected my load calculations and told me I was welcome before I'd even said thank you. We got married the following autumn, a small ceremony in a converted barn outside the city with maybe 60 guests, most of them from the office, all of them fully aware by that point of exactly how long it had taken the two of us to say the obvious thing out loud. Nate served as my best man and used most of his toast to remind the room, in exhaustive detail, that he had personally diagnosed the problem months before either of us admitted it existed, a claim Rowan's side of the room found significantly funnier than mine did. Harper, of all people, sent a card. She'd moved to another firm across town the year before, and the note inside simply read, "Glad you finally figured out who the placeholder was for. Congratulations." Rowan laughed until she cried when I showed her that one. At the reception, during the quiet lull after dinner when most people had drifted toward the dance floor, Rowan found me by the drinks table and slid her hand into mine, the same easy gesture from the airport, from that first dinner, from every ordinary morning in the 2 years since. "Do you ever think about how close we came to not doing this?" she asked. "If you hadn't come to the airport, if I'd just gone home and unpacked and gone back to work on Monday like nothing had happened." "I think about it more than I'd like to admit," I said. "Mostly at night, when I can't sleep." "Me too." She rested her head against my shoulder, watching Nate attempt something on the dance floor that could generously be called dancing. "I keep thinking about all the versions of us that don't get here. The one where I stay quiet in Bergen. The one where you never buy the parking pass. The one where we just keep being the committee forever and never say the real thing." "We don't have to think about those versions," I said. "We got the one that matters." "I know," she said. "I just like being grateful for it out loud sometimes." People ask us sometimes how we got together, expecting some tidy, romantic answer they can repeat at dinner parties. Rowan usually tells them the short version. She says, "He came to the airport, and I didn't say a word, I just held on." And I usually add the part she leaves out, the part that actually mattered. That we'd both been in love for years and too careful, too scared, too busy protecting a friendship neither of us wanted to risk, to ever say so out loud. It took an ocean of distance and 8 months of silence to finally teach us that the risk was never the danger. The danger was waiting too long to take it. Sometimes, late at night, when Rowan's already asleep beside me, and I'm still turning the day over in my head the way I always have, I think about how close I came to letting that moment pass. How easily I could have stayed quiet at the airport that morning. Let her walk past me into whatever ordinary reunion we'd have staged with the rest of our friends later that week, and never said the thing that had been sitting in my chest since long before she ever got on a plane. I think about Nate's Countdown app comment, about Harper's kind, honest observation over a dinner that never got a second date, about every small nudge from the universe that finally pushed me toward that arrivals hall 3 weeks before I needed to be there. I think, mostly, about the specific weight of Rowan's arms around my neck in that crowded airport, the way she didn't need a single word to tell me everything 8 months of silence had been protecting. Some feelings are too large for sentences. Some things you just have to hold on to and trust that the other person understands exactly what you mean. So let me ask you this. What would you have done if you'd been standing in that arrivals hall, watching someone you loved walk toward you after months of silence, unsure whether they felt the same thing you did? Would you have said something first, or would you have waited, the way we did, for the moment to say it for you? And has there ever been a person in your own life who you almost let get away simply because you were too afraid to say the thing that was true the whole time? I think about Steve sometimes too, the imaginary rogue decimal point Rowan and I blamed for a permit deadline gone sideways at 1 in the morning years before either of us admitted anything to the other. I think about how many nights like that one there were, small, ordinary, unremarkable nights that quietly built the foundation for the one morning at the airport when neither of us needed words anymore. That's the part people forget when they hear the short version of our story, the version with the dramatic reunion and the dropped suitcase and the 8 months of silence. The real story isn't the airport at all. It's every quiet, unremarkable moment before it, the ones neither of us noticed we were choosing at the time, until one day we looked up and realized we'd already chosen each other, over and over, long before either of us said so out loud. Tell me your story in the comments below. If this one hit you the way I hope it did, leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.